Okay, I think we're ready to start on behalf of the American Institute of Architects, California. Very excited to welcome all 680 people who have signed up for what I'm confident is going to be a top-notch program. I'm Michael Malinowski, FAIA, working as a consultant to AIA California in creating programs such as the AIA California Plus One House Org website, the AIA California ADU Knowledge Network, and this program you're here with us for today. With California's housing crisis so complex, involving so many nuanced and interwoven challenges, we, as the voice of the architectural profession, believe that sharing knowledge, best practices, and insight into the nuts and bolts of housing delivery, that's an important contribution to progress. With accessory dwelling units now something like 1/5 of all residential permits in California, ADUs have proven already to be a powerful force for change. Our program today is designed to bring you together with top experts in the ADU environment who will share their perspective on what's going well and where there's room for improvement. A Plus Delta deep dive. You'll find our panel includes a wide range of perspectives ranging from state departments of housing and community development, the Energy Commission, energy code assistants, legislative experts and advocates shaping the laws that support ADUs now and those to come in the future, and architects with boots on the ground providing design services for the many ADUs taking shape in California today. I know everyone on this call is very busy, so thank you for looking up from that pile on your desk to join us today. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to our program monitor, Jennifer Kretschmer, a California AIA member architect who specializes in accessory dwelling unit design and delivery. Jennifer.
Thanks, Michael. I'm really looking forward to this discussion, and you will all hear a bit from me later towards the end of this presentation. But for now, just a few quick housekeeping items before I introduce our first panelist. We have a Q&A section for any questions today. And remember to be constructive in any of those questions or comments to the presenters and to one another to ensure that we have a session that is productive. We want to use the Q&A instead of chat for questions. So we're not really going to be monitoring the chat for questions. So please use Q&A section for the questions. Also, AIA California will submit 1.5 AIA Health, Safety, Welfare Learning Units for those who complete this session live. I'm going to introduce our first presenter. Our first presenter is Michael McLaughlin. He is a housing policy specialist for the California Housing and Community Development's ADU enforcement team. He's joining the accountability unit to support all stakeholders in creating affordable housing in our own back or front yards. Professionally outside of the HCD, he serves on a planning commission. He co-directs an educational consultancy and is an award-winning documentary producer. Prior to joining HCD, he incubated participatory urban science research in Vietnam and pioneered video content in Planet Eatson, consulted for Transform and California Endowment Initiatives, advised on the board of Our Backyard Homes, a nonprofit that advocates for ADUs and tiny homes in the Los Angeles area, and has worked as a congressional aide in DC, earning degrees in political economy, neuroscience, city and regional planning. That's a long one. In his free time, he hikes with his partner, he leash trains cats and practices yoga at 180 degrees while listening to podcasts because 99% Invisible is his favorite. He's driven by his family's experience of housing insecurity and homelessness, and he evangelizes that to the best infill housing is upgrading our existing stock, and the missing middle, densities and mixed use encourage more economic, social, and cultural diversity and generate safe, more vital life and public spaces. So Michael's work at HCD is more than a job. It is definitely a calling for him. Michael, please take it away.
I'll take myself off mute here. Hopefully it's not too loud. I am in transit to a planning commission meeting right now. Unfortunately, I mean, hopefully it's not too loud. I am going to share my screen here. Let's see if everyone can see that. I'll just assume unless people are shaking their head, no, you can. I'll just jump right into it, set my timer here. But yeah, I'm here to talk a little bit about some positives and deltas about ADU law. I've been with the team for a little over 8 months now. However, I started out just building ADUs out of accessible ADUs in Los Angeles with our backyard homes. I unfortunately experienced homelessness while I was in LA, met another someone from Northwestern. We're both like highly educated folks and just we're suffering. And so we started coming up with try to come up with creative solutions. We started mapping vacant lands on how much vacant land, how many tiny dwelling units could we put in Los Angeles, parts of Los Angeles, under 200 square feet. So I started looking at this, and I currently live both in Woodland and in Orange County, and I live in an ADU. So I am fully committed really behind accessory dwelling units. This is what my team does. This is our day in, day out. We are an enforcement agency and we yell at other enforcement agencies and they yell back. But really we have three primary tasks that we perform. Ordinance enforcement review, setting guidance or distributing guidance and documentation and setting uniform standards, and providing technical assistance. You can see on the screen here, these are total active cases that we get are just shy of 1,000 that are active. You haven't seen the one we've closed out, and this portal has only been open since November of 2022. So we are a very busy team since the TA is not statutory entirely just because HPD wants to do it. So I got a question. What do discretionary review standards and Egypt have in common? I know no one can respond here, but if we can get the chat going up, I can't see, but what do discretionary review standards and Egypt have in common? Denial of ADU permits. And so that is one of the main things that that's the biggest hurdle. That's what people complain about when they're coming to us. The three biggest issues that we are seeing still in California, and we're going to talk about victories. I've seen folks talking about the statistics. There are tons of successes that's coming, but currently there's a misunderstanding about how many units are allowed on a lot. The minimum for a single family residential zone is 3, not 2. Setbacks are still a huge concern. You can build in front setbacks. There's no provision of feasibility. A lot of jurisdictions try to say you have to build in the backyard if there's space. If it's less than 800 square feet, you do not. You can build right up to the lot line if you want. Now, cities can try to prohibit you from doing that, but if that's the only space that's available, you can build in your front setback. The next largest thing, and the legislative change this year, which I know other folks are going to talk about, SB 897, non-conformances, building code violations, and unpermitted ADUs. There's not a lot of guidance right now from HCD. We're hoping to change that, but jurisdictions, I think there's just a huge lack of awareness on what is permitted and permissible and what's not permissible. So if you apply building code violations on a primary dwelling unit, you can't hold that against an ADU. If there are building code violations that are not about safety, you cannot hold that against the ADU. We can go into that further. I know we have really short time here. So objective standards are here and now and official as of 2023. And really just summed up, you can build 800 square feet with a 4-foot setback and various height, depending on if it's attached or converted. Anywhere on your property, you get a converted, a detached, and a junior accessory dwelling unit. I'm hoping most of the folks know what that is on the call. If you're on a lot with a single family residence, and 2 detached ADUs plus 1 converted minimum on multifamily lots. So you could potentially have endless on multifamilies, and so we'll come back to that maybe a little bit later. Another big hurdle, I'm sorry, I don't know if you guys are seeing everything here, but another big hurdle is discretionary non-objective standards. Okay, so those are supposed to be have gone away. There are lots of incentive programs that still employ discretionary processes, and yet they're allowing additional ADUs. So there's a bit of conflict here. I also believe that many jurisdictions, there are jurisdictions that almost every jurisdiction cannot meet the 60-day permit wait time. Sacramento claims to. We have not had one complaint from Sacramento, honestly, about permit wait times. San Diego, which permits a lot of ADUs, as at least last year, there were lots of complaints as well. So there's maybe a paragon of success as well, where we're seeing that are backing up wait times and planning departments and HOAs. You know, I won't go too far into the HOAs, but we're seeing a lot of issues with holding up ADUs that would otherwise be built. And this is a huge issue because nearly 40% of property owned in California is in some way within an HOA's discretion. So some of the successes though, right? And I don't know if we're going to talk about it a little bit further, but the ADU incentive programs where you get minimum by right ADUs and then deed restricted. San Diego was one of the first. Other cities are also doing this. I don't want to go too much into that, but they went from basically having 0 ADUs to 300 within 2 years. So that's just an example for me of incentive programs, which are becoming more common now. I'm sure some of the architects might discuss some of the issues with those as well, with some of them. Another barrier and positive, though, are ADU universal checklists and just making the process much easier so that there is less back and forth. San Jose does a pretty good job of this. I haven't been through the process. I can only see it from the outside and what they've shown us, but seeing good processes in play. And then also just funding. You know, even the town of Truckee providing ADU grants and loan programs for their residents to build ADUs. So I think these are all hugely important. I didn't even start my timer, so I have no idea if I'm on time or not, but I'm just going to move on. So how many ADUs are allowed on a multifamily lot? I don't know if anyone was paying attention a couple minutes ago. I don't know if there's answers coming in. I do see answers coming in. It is 3 indeed. That's a minimum. We have seen a project that has had 100 ADUs that were proposed in the plan development as just part of it. And then they're also figuring out how to potentially create an additional 20 or 25 ADUs in a multifamily development. So that one is a really big game changer, especially for mixed use zones. For state laws, I'm happy to answer questions. I know I kind of glossed over some of those. We can get into the nitty gritties if needed. There we go. But really, that's all I had. I just wanted to kind of kick off some of the three big process issues, 3 big kind of more like zoning issues that we're seeing, and deltas and some positives that department regularly, not regularly, but that we are looking for in terms of best practices and sharing with institutions like the Turner Center. So that's all I've got. Feel free to reach out to me by email or if you have a technical assistance question directly, please submit that at our ADU portal. It's wonderful, but because we also want to track everything for public requests, please submit technical assistance questions to the portal. If you just want to reach out to me and collaborate, or you just please send me an email.
Thank you, Michael. That was great. And we're going to move on to Nick Brown. And again, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. And Michael, there were a few for you, so if you could go ahead and do that. And Michael, can you mute yourself so that the background noise, we don't hear that? Thank you. Okay, So let me pull this. Nick Brown is a certified energy analyst for residential and associate energy analyst for non-residential construction by the California Association of Building Energy Consultants, and has maintained his certifications for 2008, 2013, 2016, and 2019 code cycles so far. He is a subject matter expert on the Energy Code ACE statewide education team and teaches classes for Southern California Edison on net zero design, all electric homes, heat pumps, and selling clean energy homes. As part of CalSeed team, Nick is currently researching phase change material applications in HVAC systems. Nick was elected to the board of directors of CABEC beginning in 2018. Nick, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Jennifer, and thanks for keeping it short.
Get out of here. Go away. Ouch.
All right, what I wanted to cover, and you ADU builders in my experience are all becoming experts on energy because it's one of the many hurdles you face in putting these units in place. So I wanted to cover the fact that ADUs, I went back over my 2022 work, 25% of the units I worked on were ADUs. So that lines up pretty neatly with Casita's numbers and the 20% number that Michael quoted. More and more of them are all electric, and I'll go over a little bit why that is. I've been in construction and residential construction for 20 plus years, and factory built is starting to become significant, and I never thought it would. We'll talk a little bit about that. And I'm going to cover briefly my experience using the Title 24 exceptions. But Chris Olvera is with us today, and he's with the California Energy Commission, so you can get it from an authority figure, which will be even better. But I'll work in some tips and things that I've found work to get the more challenging ADU projects into compliance. And shown above my garage here on the right is an all-electric net zero carbon ADU that we built. It's been rented happily to a couple since July 1st and working great. So first of all, I went back and fully 54 units went through my practice just last year. It's way up from several years before, 25%. So why all electric? Well, you can see the ductless mini split heat pump on the wall to the right of the common room of our ADU. They're perfect. And there are great electric water heating, cooking, and clothes drying options available too. So you can get simplified utility connections by just sticking to one power source. It can be less expensive to build, less expensive to operate when paired with solar panels. We find all electric homes in general have greenhouse gas emissions roughly half that of the way we've typically built with gas in them. Yeah, 50% lower greenhouse gas emissions, improved health because we don't have combustion byproducts from the cooktop in particular. Easier energy code compliance. And this wasn't the case 6 years ago. It is the case now, especially the 2022 Energy Code, which started January 1st, has heat pumps prescriptive standard all over the state, either a water heating heat pump or a space conditioning heat pump. So you're just going to find everything easier pathway, all electric, even more so today than just last year. And as I said before, these heat pumps are ideal. Factory built, I'm seeing multiple projects every month come across my desk that are factory built. And I think it's because they allow for less hassle for the homeowners. Generally, these factory built modular ADU builders are handling site prep, they're handling permits. And so it's just less time out of their professional lives for the homeowners to manage the project. Typically a little bit higher cost than site built in return for that benefit. And when you think about it, they can be beautiful like the one shown on the right because the design costs can be spread over multiple units. My energy code compliance services, all the structural spread out over multiple units instead of a one-off. So here are the highlights of what's working for me with ADU code compliance. The CEC has worked diligently over the last probably 4 or 5 years, Chris Olvera, to put in place exceptions to encourage not snuff out ADU building. First off, they allowed conversions of existing unconditioned space to comply as additions. So that's a lower hurdle than new construction would be. Therefore, those additions also didn't require solar, and existing walls were only really required to fill the cavity with what can fit. So the rigid insulation that's prescriptive standard for new construction, we typically didn't have to use in ADU construction. Then this code cycle, we added this really helpful PV exception that says, if the energy code equation indicates a solar system less than 1.8 kilowatts, you don't have to put on solar at all. Think of this as a cost effectiveness exception, because these systems are so small, just 5 or 6 panels, they're not cost effective. Note that the square footage of the ADU at which this 1.8 kilowatt occurs is different in different climate zones. So I can't tell you that's an 800 square foot ADU. You're going to need to check with your energy consultant to find out exactly where that occurs. Then water heating. Heat pump water heaters have become prescriptive standard in 12 of the 16 climate zones and all of the LA climate zones I generally work in. But there is an electric tankless exception allowed in recognition of the fact it's sometimes hard to find space for that heat pump water heater tank. So if you're building ADUs less than 500 square feet, you can take this exception, whether you're using the prescriptive method or the performance method. There's a box to check in this performance software if you want to do it there. As long you do have to have point of use distribution system, that's a HERS verified measure. And there's 120 volt heat pump water heaters coming on the market. These require less power than the typical 240 volt units, and they're allowed in units 1 bedroom or less. Now, the biggest code compliance boost available to ADU builders is the VCHP credit. I'm here to tell you that can account for many sins elsewhere in the building because they're just so efficient and so ideal for ADUs. So make sure your energy consultants are making use of that. Ideal for ducted and ductless mini splits. I'll sum up by saying the all-electric ADU that we built is working great. Here are some of the specs. We used a high-performance SIPS building envelope. Expected utility bills are microscopic. We had a heat recovery ventilator, a number of nice features, but a basic all-electric ADU is going to perform great as well. And I'll just flash this on the screen so you can look at it in the recording. But the ADU compared to the main house, same climate zone, same record day, September 6th of last year, you can see in the green just how much more harmony that ADU is working with the grid than the main house with a more standard air conditioning system. And a lot of that energy use is under the PV mountain in blue. That's all I had. Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you, Nick. All right, we are going to move on to Denise. Hi, Denise. So Denise Pinkston has over 35 years of experience in real estate development and planning, and is currently partner in TMG Partners, a full-service real estate development and operating company headquartered in San Francisco. Ms. Pinkston has been recognized as an influential leader in her profession and as a community leader dedicated to improving housing and transportation policy in California. Her honors include Globe Street Real Estate Forum's Women of Influence Impact Award in 2021, Advocate of the Year in 2019 for BIA Bay Area, Legacy Award Oakland Jobs and Housing Coalition in 2018, San Francisco Business Times Most Influential Women in Bay Area Business in 2012, 2013, and 2016. Her housing and transportation leadership has included founder and president of the Casita Coalition, which is a California 501c3 to promote middle housing and ADUs. She's the technical advisor advocate for several recent California housing and ADU streamlining laws, including the Housing Accountability Act, SB 330, and amendments to state density bonus, SB 1069 and AB 68. She's the chair, Bay Area Council Housing Committee moderator, MTC Committee to House the Bay Area, also known as CASA, member of SPUR Housing Committee, and founder, CEO, and past president of MVGO Last Mile Shuttle Service in Mountain View. She's on the zoning board chair and planning commissioner for the city of Berkeley, and planning and real estate instructor at SFSU Mills College. Ms. Pinkston attended the University of California at Berkeley, where she earned a BA in history and a master's in city and regional planning. Denise, thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much. I see someone gave me a Go Bear shout out. Thanks. So what I wanted to do was describe, it is amazing to me that since the first statewide ADU bill was adopted, SB 1069 in 2016, took effect in 2017, that there are 700 architects who are building or interested in building ADUs. The amount of growth in this space has been, I think, fair to use superlatives like unprecedented, and it's been called in California an ADU revolution. So I just want to give you a quick overview of how we got there with some slides. So next slide. This is a description of how the coalition of Yes to More Small Housing got state ADU laws adopted incrementally, one set of barriers at a time. I won't go through all of them. A lot of this is familiar to you, but essentially the strategy was start with something that people can accept. Conversion of existing structures should be allowed to be housing if they can be made safe under the building code. And then over time, increasingly California has done zoning reform. Next slide. This describes the first bill that we did in 2016. And really here we're talking about messaging to people who aren't familiar with this. So we made some definitional changes, hence we are using ADU now. We're not calling them second units because they're accessory to the single family use. We allowed remodeling of the existing space and a ministerial process. Next slide. Sorry, my dog is going crazy. We also really started working on messaging that says, hey, look, your neighbors don't get a lifestyle veto over your life or your family's life. And local control does not begin at City Hall, it begins at home. Government should stay out of your bedroom and they should stay out of who cooks and cleans where on your property if it's a way for you to house family members and community members. Next slide. Next slide. Obviously, for those of you here who are architects and do code compliance, only state action in this space creates a path to safe, uniform legal ADUs that can correct longstanding code violations that have killed people in California and elsewhere. Next slide. And the most important thing we did, and the reason I'm here having conversations with you about this today, is that we created a huge coalition of yes to more housing, at least in this small space. And that's really what the Casita Coalition's ongoing work is to continue to build a really big tent of people who understand the importance of having housing choice and options in all neighborhoods. Next slide. And the result is that ADUs are being built all over the state. I just got an email that 30% of all building permits in LA have become ADUs. It's 20% of all building permits statewide in California. It's all over the state, urban, rural, wealthy, less wealthy. Cities are doing their own incredible innovations. And we're really seeing the dawn of a major shift in how Californians live together and use our urban infill land to house more people in every neighborhood. Next slide. We estimate that this has become very quickly a $6 billion industry in California. all without public subsidy, without major government programming to create it, other than to support it through the good work of HCD and Michael. And someone mentioned prefab ADUs. There's just been an explosion in innovation, construction, renovation, companies that are delivering ADUs different ways, different business models, different capital stacks. So increasingly, they're doing all the work for the homeowners so that homeowners don't have to be developers, just as in many private architects and design build construction companies are increasingly taking on the project management role for homeowners. Next slide. And as we've learned, and some of the Q&A leads to this, there's still a lot of barriers to accessory dwelling units. Zoning was just the first. Some of these we couldn't even see initially, including lack of capital, lack of access to finance, which is not the topic for today, but is a major barrier because federally guaranteed loans cannot be applied to build ADUs or anything on a single family lot that doesn't already, with income that doesn't exist today. So that makes it hard. There's also a huge lack of awareness, understanding for homeowners, for professionals, for building officials, for cities. So we're all learning this together, and it creates a certain amount of confusion and chaos that I think all of us are helpful in resolving through working on public education and awareness for the general public, but also for the professional community. Next slide. Next slide. There we go. So in these, this is where Casita Coalition's deep work is now. We're working on these second generation barriers, particularly finance changes. We work to get $100 million in the state budget to jumpstart ADU finance. We've been working on education and advocacy around lending practices with HUD, the White House, a variety of federal agencies, state agencies. We're working with appraisers and the brokerage community on doing better data tracking for comparable sales so that loans can be sized for future ADUs. Next slide. And we're doing increasing work in the communications and messaging space. We're just a few years old as an organization, but if you join Casita Coalition at casitacoalition.org, you will get access to our social media, our LinkedIn. We invite you to join us, follow us, track us, and generally spread the word so that clients, homeowners, professionals know that Casita Coalition and this growing coalition of yes to more housing types has a place to go to get information, to learn about the various aspects of the industry, and generally speaking, to find out more. Next slide. Casita Coalition has done some deep dives to educate working professionals in the private sector as well as in government to walk people through these rule changes and where these things get a little confusing. So permitting or guidebook to unpermitted ADUs and the issues around that. General ADU best practices in cities that we encourage other cities to follow. An SB9 explainer guidebook for folks who are trying to understand SB9 versus ADUs, ADU finance, a multifamily ADU guidebook, and a garage conversion guidebook. And we find that these guidance memos are really helpful places that we update frequently that are really like an FAQ on a particular topic area. All of these are available for free on our website if you just log on and explore this. We also have, next slide, an ADU gallery of exemplars of homeowners' work and architect designer work across the state. We have blog postings where we analyze what we're seeing from a high level on the topic of middle housing, but also the work of various designers and architects in California. Next slide. We are starting to get into the more active digital messaging and communication storytelling space, because a lot of this for policymakers comes down to putting a human face on a complex policy space. So we've been doing videos that tell the human stories of people who built an ADU and who benefit from them. Next slide. This is our ADU gallery. We invite designers who are building ADUs, please feel free to join the Casita Coalition and load up your exemplars so homeowners can find them on our website. Next slide. We're also doing homeowner fairs and professional training seminars around the state where we find out, we participate and provide information to folks. These are just a few examples. Next slide. These kind of homeowner fairs are particularly helpful for getting homeowners connected with professionals who can help them. And then we've started doing ADU mixers, statewide calls with professionals to answer questions that are sticky points for folks, and to do more dynamic professional education and support. Next slide. We're also starting to find out lots of people are interested in this, not just in California, but on the entire West Coast, starting up in British Columbia and going all the way down to the Mexican border, and across the country, where cities and states are starting to move in the direction that California moved, to adopt statewide standards or very widely adopted regional standards. And it's getting the attention of national housing policy organizations, philanthropies, and the federal government. So we think these kinds of national coalition building efforts are super important to resolve some of the bigger barriers to wider uptake of ADUs, like ADU finance. Next slide. So we invite all of you to follow the Casita Coalition or to join the coalition through our website. We will be hosting our first national convening of thought leaders and professionals in the fall of 2023. If you're interested, let us know. And in general, we are here to help. Obviously, AIA is doing a terrific job publicizing the importance of ADUs across the state to working professionals who are in the architecture and design fields. And Casita Coalition tries to bring in people who are builders, who are lenders, who are brokers, to knit together this coalition of folks, all of whom are important to increasing this form of housing. So thank you for your time and your attention.
Thank you, Denise. Let me make sure. Okay. All right. So our next speaker is Meji Tabar, is the principal consultant to the California State Senate Housing Committee, chaired by Senator Scott Wiener. Before joining the committee, Ms. Tabar worked at the California Department of Housing and Community Development, also known as HCD, as the data and research manager and a senior housing specialist, where she led, managed, and implemented public lands for affordable housing development programs, and was the primary author of the 2022 statewide housing plan. Prior to working with the state of California, Ms. Tabar worked for consulting firms in Denver and in San Francisco, where she worked directly with communities, developers, local, regional, and state governments on federally required housing needs studies, consolidated and strategic plans, policy and regulation compliance, and housing market studies. Ms. Tabar is an AICP certified planner and holds a Master of Urban and Regional Planning degree from University of California, Irvine. Meji, please take it away.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. My name is Meji. You had the whole intro, so I won't get into everything. As mentioned, I'm the principal consultant for the California Senate Housing Committee. I am our ADU expert, very much in quotes, in our office, which really just means that any ADU bills that come through our committee, I will analyze, provide recommendations. Committees are really the folks who are going to lend the policy expertise. So let me get started here. Right. Okay. What's going well? Everyone's seeing my screen, correct? Okay, perfect. Thanks. So what's going well? We've heard a lot of information so far about ADUs, a little bit more about kind of the situation on the ground. I'm going to take a step back and kind of look at it from a more holistic level. So what's going well? ADU laws are working since the 2017 housing package, and a number of bills that Denise had mentioned have really unlocked potentials for ADUs to be built. As you can see from this graph on the screen, ADU permits issued statewide have dramatically increased since 2013, but particularly since 2017, when that big housing package passed through the legislature. We're continuing to diversify our housing stock, which is really important as we continue to deal with the housing crisis. We need as many different housing options for the diverse needs of different Californians. And so ADUs provide a very specific need for certain types of populations. I also think it is a space in housing where creativity is really thriving. We've heard some great examples of how ADUs have been used again on the ground, but we're really unlocking more housing potentials and opportunities. I've heard stories of folks who are trying to build new housing and then trying to increase unit count by building an ADU and then a JADU. I've heard of folks who are trying to figure out ways to get past the owner occupancy requirement, which I'll touch upon in a moment. But finding ways around that to really take one unit and turn it into either 2 or 3 units through the ADU or JADU. I do think there are a lot of opportunities for improvement in ADUs. I think this, and not to say I don't love ADUs as much as everyone else does, but really from the public policy perspective, ADUs are not a production tool. This is really one of the tools in our housing production toolbox. It allows us to potentially build in places that are maybe not as pro-housing or friendly to density. It lets us access a single family home neighborhoods. And so, not to discourage anyone, but as we're thinking about the housing crisis, I mean, this is one tool. And so, just really to emphasize that point, I have a graph on here, and I know it's a little bit small. This is from the statewide housing plan that I authored last year when I was working for HCD. But this is documenting new permitted housing units in California since 1980. The bottom line right here is average units per year that have been built. And this top line are the units that we need today to meet current housing needs. This is not talking about future housing needs, just current housing needs. And so this is just showing you kind of the breakdown of single family homes versus multifamily structures. This includes ADUs. But we're talking about 2.5 million units needed over the next 10 years, 1.5 of which need to be affordable to lower income populations. ADUs, again, like, it's amazing we're unlocking these opportunities, but we're talking about 20,000 units produced last year. And so as we're thinking about kind of the future of ADUs, I think it's fair to think about what's the role that ADUs have in public policy and production. A key point, and I obviously won't go into it, but Denise mentioned it. Part of that is funding and financing. It continues to be a challenge. The California Housing Finance Agency does have a program that gives grants for pre-development work on ADUs up to $40,000 for lower income households. But $40,000 for pre-development work is not that much compared to the cost of the entire ADU development. And so, funding, financing of these units are going to be essential to really think about how to turn ADUs into a production tool. And then the other piece of that is the owner occupancy sunset. If you followed any sort of ADU legislation, you know that this continues to be a challenge in the legislature. There is a current sunset in ADU law where currently there is no owner occupancy requirement, but that will sunset and eventually there will be. And what I mean by this chilling effect is that we have heard statewide that there are a number of cities or developers who don't even want to dip their toe into ADUs because they're worried about this future owner occupancy requirement. And for those of you who maybe don't understand what that means, it's just to say that an owner has to live on the property to rent out an ADU on that property. And we know that that's not always a situation for everybody. And again, if we're thinking about ADUs as a production tool, that's pretty limiting. And so let's go next. What's coming next? In terms of the owner occupancy sunset, there is a bill in the Assembly this year that is trying to remove that sunset to try to deal with that barrier. I think there will be continuing conversations on affordability of ADUs and policies. Currently, there is no affordability requirement for ADUs, and I don't necessarily see that in the future. While ADUs could be a natural form of affordable housing, I think potentially putting affordability requirements could put a barrier on ADU development. And so for that reason, I think the general feeling is that affordability requirements on ADUs are just not appropriate right now. Michael from HCD mentioned this great program out of San Diego, where it is a 1+1 program where you build one ADU at market rate, and then you have to deed restrict a second ADU, which you normally wouldn't have the opportunity to build that second ADU if it is deed restricted for lower income households. And so maybe in that way, there's some opportunity to deed restrict ADUs. But again, continuing conversation, a ton of Assembly bills dealing with ADUs. I won't go through all of those yet. I'm on the Senate side, so these bills have not come to our House yet. Surprisingly, no Senate bills deal with ADU this year. And I think that has a lot to do with leaders in ADU legislation. So many of you may know Senator Wachowski. He termed out last year. He was a huge champion of ADUs. And before he left, he authored AB 897, which did increase the allowable height of ADUs under certain conditions. And so I think the big question is, who will lead ADU legislation going forward? Assemblymember Ting has also been a champion, but he will also term out soon. And so I think as we all think about the future here, continuing the momentum around ADUs will be really beneficial and hopefully lead to leaders in the legislature as well. That is all I had to share for today. Happy to answer questions. Our office cannot give any legal advice or interpretations of statute, but happy to chat more if you have questions.
Please excuse me, I started speaking without my mic on. Thank you, Meiji. Meiji, thank you so much. Christopher Olvera is our next speaker. He is the supervisor of the California Energy Commission's Outreach and Education Unit, which develops tools, presentations, and resources to support compliance and enforcement with the Energy Code. Chris has over 19 years of experience working at the Energy Commission. He began work as a student in the Energy Standards Hotline, fielding questions about the Energy Code from designers, architects, engineers, builders, and contractors, enforcement agencies, and homeowners. He has worked with numerous enforcement agencies and the industry stakeholders statewide and has been providing Energy Code training for the past 15 years. Chris has served as several other positions supporting a variety of programs, including compliance and enforcement, the Home Energy Rating System, HERS program, the Acceptance Test Technician Certification Provider program, processing low interest energy conservation assistance act loans, and the Bright Schools program, and also facilitating upgrades per the Clean Energy Jobs Act, known as Proposition 39. Christopher, welcome and thank you. Take it away.
Thank you. Okay, is it okay if I share my screen? I have a couple of slides I can share briefly.
Please do.
All righty. Okay, you're seeing my screen, my slides here?
Yep.
All right. Okay, so first of all, thank you to Nick for focusing and educating about the Energy Code requirements. One thing I want to focus on is kind of reiterate some of those and emphasize some of those exceptions that Nick talked about. but also provide a couple of clarifications too. So the question we always get is, what requirements does an ADU have to meet? It depends. We mentioned junior ADUs a couple of instances, but generally speaking, our regs don't call out ADUs separately. So when you have an ADU, what requirements it must meet per the energy code, which is Title 24, Part 6, is you need to determine, is it a newly constructed building? Is it an addition, or is it an alteration? So you need to start there. What type of building or what building construction type is this per the energy code to determine, okay, then, quote unquote, what rabbit hole do I go down to figure out which requirements will apply to my ADU? So that's the first step. We also receive a lot of questions frequently asked, what about manufactured homes? Do manufactured homes need to meet the energy code? And this is per the HCD, the HUD regulations. Manufactured homes meet Title 25, not Title 24. But if you have questions, I recommend please defer to HCD. Factory built homes per the regulations do need to meet Title 24. But we're asked frequently, do manufactured homes need to meet the energy code? Do they need to meet the PV requirements? And the simple answer is, if they're a manufactured home per HCD requirements, they're regulated by Title 25, not Title 24. But factory built homes per the regulations do meet Title 24, including the energy code requirements, the PV requirements, et cetera, et cetera. What's going well is I want to say that we received, in particular, after implementation of the 2019 Energy Code, a lot of feedback, numerous responses, some of the hurdles for ADUs as it to the PV requirements, also decarbonizing or having electrifying an all-electric ADU, being able to do that, but be able to do so with the energy code requirements. And so what I would say is going well is that we heard you, we've been responsive. And I would say moving forward, yeah, please, we, the Energy Commission, ask that you continue to provide your feedback during the development process, because we want to continue considering, when we propose new regulations for newly constructed buildings, how our ADUs, how should they be treated? Our baseline, the conditioned floor area is going to be different. So treating those, considering those separately, as well as ADUs that are additions as well. So moving forward, please continue providing that feedback so that we know which particulars to consider for ADUs differently when proposing these regulations, when the baseline is going to be for a larger home, quote unquote, for newly constructed buildings. So for newly constructed buildings, we have a couple of exceptions. Again, we don't call out ADU specifically, but if it's 500 square feet or less, they don't have to meet the whole house ventilating cooling requirements. For 2022, for newly constructed buildings, a heat pump water heater is a new prescriptive baseline. There are some exceptions. If you want to have an all-electric ADU, you can go with the heat pump, or you can go with an electric instantaneous water heater to conserve that space. It is for dwelling units 500 square feet or less, and you also have to meet the point of use requirements. You could also go with the 120 volt heat pump water heater in place of the 240 volt if there's only one bedroom. With that said, again, yeah, for newly constructed ADUs, we have new energy storage ready requirements. These requirements do apply to newly constructed buildings, but we get a lot of questions saying, hey, what if they're going to use the main panel or drop from there and have a sub panel? And the question is, well, what if the main panel to the existing house meets the 225 amp requirements? Is that okay? Can the sub panel serving the ADU be less? And the answer is yes. We clarified that in a recent blueprint, saying that as long as the existing homes panel meets the 225 amp requirements and you meet these additional requirements, the sub panel to the ADU can be less. Also, for newly constructed buildings, the PV requirements, we received a lot of feedback saying, hey, with these smaller ADUs, we're getting calculating out a small PV size. Contractors don't even want to come out and install. It's not cost effective for them or worth their time. So we have this new exception now. Again, we're not calling out ADUs, but we say if the PV system, the size required PV system, the calculation is less than 1.8 kilowatts, then PV does not apply. With that said, if PV is not applicable, solar ready then kicks in. But we did provide a clarification in the blueprint that if you have an ADU, newly constructed ADU going on an existing lot, solar ready does not apply to those either, because the intent of that was to apply to newly constructed tract development, single family homes. So if you meet the 1.8, if it's less than 1.8 kilowatts, and you're exempt from the PV requirements, and potentially you're exempt from the solar ready requirements if it's an ADU, newly constructed ADU on an existing lot. Couple of instances where we call out junior ADUs, in particular for the additions and the whole house ventilation requirements, the indoor air quality. Any addition that increases the number of dwelling units must meet the asterisk 62.2, both local and whole building ventilation, but we had a new exception for 2022. The junior ADUs that are additions do not need to meet the whole building ventilation requirements. And then also the instantaneous electric water heater allowance is also permissible in additions less than 500 square feet as well. And then for resources, we have our online resource center. If you want more information on the energy code, I highly recommend, if you're not subscribed to our blueprint, you can see the list here. We get a lot of questions on ADUs. And so we always provide those clarifications or included in FAQs in our blueprint newsletter. It's published quarterly, so I highly recommend subscribe if you are not. We also have our hotline. They're working remotely, so I recommend if you have any technical inquiries, you email them. And that's it for me. Like I said, what's been working well is that we're receiving your feedback and we're codifying clarifications into the code to accommodate ADUs. And I just ask that you continue providing that feedback so that we can continue the same trend moving forward. And that was it for me.
Thank you so much, Christopher. Our next speaker is Ellen Bildston, AIA, of Bildston Architecture and Planning. Ellen has been a licensed architect since 1995 and is an active member of state and local AIA, which is the American Institute of Architects. After moving with her family to Santa Barbara in 1999, she worked on custom residential projects with Bob Easton Architects. She and Susan Sherwin were the partners of Bildston and Sherwin Design Studio from 2002 until 2014, when Ellen established the latest architectural adventure, Bildston Architecture and Planning. Ellen, welcome today.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Let's see. Hi. I'm not sure if you heard what I just said, but thank you very much, Jennifer, for the introduction. Yeah, a local perspective. Our firm is based in Santa Barbara, and certainly creating housing in Santa Barbara has been a significant challenge. I would say as a community, we left several decades behind in terms of producing any new housing in our community. And ADUs would be the first kind of real move in terms of creating some new housing in our area. Multifamily housing is another realm that is much more controversial than ADUs turn out to be. And I think the scale of them makes them really palatable in a community that's very design review oriented, very much caring about how things are compatible with older structures that we have in our community already. So it's been a really interesting pursuit within our firm to, work with people to get ADUs designed and permitted. The various iterations we've been through on the state law has certainly given Santa Barbara a run for their money in terms of creating new ordinances. Every time a new state law comes through, we like to put our local stamp on how it works here in our special place. So that's been really interesting to watch the evolution of this law, and as a practitioner to keep track of the nuances as state law and then our local ordinances kind of keep evolving, always a little bit in the shadow of the state law. One of the more interesting things that we've seen change over time is it used to be that you had to have a separate permit for ADU relative to any other improvement you might want to make on that property. And as of this latest round of ordinance changes, we're seeing now that we can separate the permits, or we don't need to, we have the option either of keeping those permits separate or combining them, which in many cases is a real streamlining possibility in terms of the overall permit process that we otherwise would need to go through. Of course, the main residence or the main structure needs to go through design review. So depending on the particulars of the owner's circumstances, if they are willing to wait and see both of them get permitted together, even if we have some extra steps in the process on the primary residence side of the equation, still that's very helpful to kind of keep the process more streamlined. A couple other impacts we're seeing, especially in this latest round of local ordinance, is a creation of an objective design standard, which rather than spelling out what exactly that is, we now have a requirement that the ADU, if it's new, detached, or attached, needs to be constructed using the same architectural style, roof pitch, exterior building materials, colors, and finishes as the primary unit in almost all circumstances. So that kind of threw our firm for a loop. We tend to think of ADUs, well, we started out thinking ADUs were a great opportunity to bring some more contemporary design into Santa Barbara. And now we're finding that some of those creative possibilities are getting reduced as things march along. And I think that's in the context of maintaining not needing to have design review in most cases. So it seems like a double-edged sword not having design review, because therefore our jurisdiction is making us design our ADUs as like knockoffs on the primary dwelling unit, which sometimes is okay because it's fine, but in other cases feels like not the best solution and a bit of a curbing of creativity. Yeah, we also have open yard requirements that are quite different for ADUs, which really allows for smaller parcels to still allow for ADUs to occur, and kind of a relaxing of open yard requirements. In this latest round, we also got a new allowance for commercial properties to have ADUs built into spaces that were previously retail spaces, but those always need to occur on the second floor or above. So anyway, just a bit of news from the trenches. As a lot of other speakers have talked about, of course, there are opportunities for modular construction on some of these ADUs. As a community that has adopted all electric requirement for any new construction, we're very excited that a lot of our ADUs are being built in that way, and we're taking that many steps closer to net zero solutions for construction, and that's all for the good. And then going through the housing element process in our community and statewide right now, certainly ADUs are playing a big role. The city of Santa Barbara has a requirement for 8,000 units, and a good portion of those are being, we're depending on the continuing production of ADUs to help address the need. So with that, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Ellen. All right, and I'm going to be the last one speaking today. I'm also a licensed architect and a member of the AIA. My firm has been around since 2003 and specialized in single family homes and ADUs and small scale multifamily residential. Been doing ADUs since before we called them ADUs, just little backyard houses wherever a municipality would allow them. And as the state law changed and really became more effective in 2020, about 50% of my work now is working on ADUs. Next slide. And so I actually fully embrace ADUs as a method of creating infill housing. It's something that can be allow for more equity and diversify neighborhoods that would normally be pretty monochromatic, or just pretty much the same in a single family neighborhood. And it also gives homeowners the opportunity to have more flexibility within their own properties, allowing them to rent or to bring in multi-generations into their own household, as many of my clients are building ADUs specifically for aging parents, or moving into the ADUs themselves, so their children who have children themselves, so their grandchildren, can all move into the primary residence. And then quite a few are actually building them for extra income by putting them out on the market and renting them out. Next slide. But I really specifically would like to talk about that I got into the City of San Jose pre-approved ADU vendor program and created this all-electric ADU design that could pretty much fit in anybody's single-family backyard. It's 476 square feet, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, and it's been a little popular model. And we've been able to make it work by in multiple different locations, even though it's pretty much the same design. We do a site-specific site plan for each property, but the rest of the plan set and documents are the same from one location to another. At this point, this particular ADU is pre-approved in San Jose, Cupertino, and Fremont, but I do have ADUs pre-approved in 16 jurisdictions, and about to get approved in 12 more jurisdictions. So pretty soon, by the end of this year, we'll be pre-approved in at least 28 different jurisdictions. Next slide. So this particular ADU, little simple floor plan, our goal in general was to promote ADUs, but also promote all electric ADUs. And so the decision was to create a well-designed all electric ADU that could fit in the majority of lots, would comply to a lot of municipal requirements, that it should be pretty similar to the existing house. So, looking at what was in our Bay Area housing stock and what kind of works within those parameters created this design. Next slide. And part of being able to go all electric is including things, and some of this is from the 2019 code, so some of this will now change, including PVs, which for this particular ADU is 1.64 kilowatt DC. And so now with the new codes, we wouldn't be required to do it. Insulating and creating high vaulted ceilings, slope ceilings, so that this tiny spaces felt a little bigger. We're using heat pump water heaters and HVAC heat pump, typical mini splits, putting induction ranges with electric ovens. And then to make it work pretty much on any property, the Title 24 report is done for all orientations. And then we do have to do a separate report when there's a different climate zone. Next slide. All right, and I just want to show you a couple of pictures of the ADU, this particular ADU completed. Next slide for the inside. It's only 476 square feet, but it does feel pretty spacious. And the next slide has some pictures of it in some other municipalities and some other locations. And we do have a mirror image plan so that the homeowner can choose whether they want it oriented in one direction or another. So one of the things on our Plus Delta today was to talk about what's been working and what needs improvement. So next slide, I have some things that I really feel have been working for us. One, of course, since the state laws now required municipalities to allow ADUs, it really opened up the ability to do more ADUs. We have found that homeowners really want them. And I heard a statistic earlier this year that 22% of all permits in California are ADUs. Since getting into the City of San Jose pre-approved ADU program, it's been a good program in that homeowners come directly to us to purchase our plans and our services instead of the municipality giving them out for free. This gives them the opportunity to choose whom to hire, promotes good design, and variation of options in streamlining and condensing that plan review process. And since we've been involved in the San Jose pre-approved program since 2020, yes, 2020. In 2021, the statistic in San Jose was actually that 38% of all permits were actually ADUs. I don't have the 2022 statistic yet. So all of this is working. Where is there room for improvement? Next slide. Well, same thing, although the state law, has required municipalities to allow ADUs. And I think a lot of architects are feeling this pain. Not all are complying or are making it difficult for homeowners, and so that the homeowners end up giving up on the process. And sometimes the process is a little more lengthy than they're supposed to doing. They're complying to that first 30 days, but then sometimes they're not complying. So it seems like there's some variation from municipality to municipality, and knowing that as an architect when you're going into these different locations is pretty important. And again, they can also differ greatly in their interpretation of code and the state law, and that makes it difficult when I need to advise homeowners on what can we do on their particular property. Some of the examples that I have found is how they interpret multiple buildings on the same lot in relationship to like fire rating and the CBC versus the CRC. So for example, the CBC says in single family lots, if you have multiple buildings on it, there's no fire rating, but then you've got the CRC. It doesn't say that specifically, but what it does have is it has the Table R302.1 that discusses the fire separation, and a lot of municipalities are putting in an imaginary fire separation line between the two buildings and then requiring that distance to be greater than the 6 feet that we see from state law because of fire separation, or requiring fire rating on the primary residence in order to get the distance closer. So it can vary from one municipality to another. I talk to building officials all the time, and first thing I ask them is, what is your interpretation of this in the distance between a primary residence and a detached ADU? Another thing is how floor area is calculated. Most of the municipalities seem to be saying that they're calculating the floor area from the exterior wall, but then the CBC also says that we calculate floor area from the interior wall. We're not sure exactly, again, it's another question we ask every municipality. Well, how are you going to calculate the floor area for this? And so we had to make a decision that when we're reusing an ADU from one municipality to another, we're just going to give it that outside dimension for the floor area. And then another new thing that's happened to me this year that has made things difficult as far as code interpretation is that even though I have ADUs that are more than 400 square feet, some of them are trying to apply the tiny home appendix AQ, especially when we're doing things like lofts or floor areas on that, they're using appendix AQ. And just to know that sometimes they're going to refer to that even if your ADU is 500 square feet and not 400 square feet, which is the definition of a tiny home. So that's kind of where I'm at for today. Thank you. And okay, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to pull up another document. Great, so thank you all to our panelists. We're going to move into question and answers. And so Rebecca, if we could bring all of our panelists' cameras up front. And all of our panelists, let's turn our mics on. And we've got some great questions that are in the background coming up. One of the questions I'd like to ask, and maybe this might be HCD, but the interpretation of new state law about front setbacks. We still have the 4-foot side and rear, but now it says you cannot prevent someone from putting an ADU in the front yard of a home. Does anybody have a good interpretation of what that means when we're actually working on an ADU in the front of a home?
I think the HCD fellow had to leave, right?
I thought he was
Because
coming.
he was at
I'm
the
still
airport.
here. I'm still here. I
Oh, there
didn't
you
know
are,
if you
Mike.
guys wanted
Oh,
me
okay,
to weigh in
good.
on that. Yeah, I'm just not on camera at the moment. Hey, my flight was delayed, so I'm just heading off to the flight here.
Oh, no.
I'm happy to weigh in on that. I mean, there's kind of a practical aspect question to that, which I would defer to an architect. However, you can build nothing shall preclude an ADU of 800 square feet or less from existing within the front setback. There's no provision of feasibility. Jurisdictions can't just just decide they like an ADU can fit where they want it to and change the design that a homeowner wants. That would comply with state law and building code and other applicable standards. Any other questions?
No, that's a good one. Okay. We have a question from Tim that says the city of LA allows on a single family R1 lot, 1 ADU and 1 junior ADU. The first speaker's opening statement, 3 ADUs are allowed. Fantastic, but the building department will not allow us to do 3 units on the same R1 property to my knowledge. Where is this section in LA City Municipal Code or Zoning Code or inter-office? Basically, how do you end up getting 3 ADUs on a single family property?
Sure. And so, I mean, I haven't looked at Los Angeles's ordinances recently. We might be talking about their ordinance, which they have the right, they can still apply standards to units created pursuant to what we call subdivision A, which are units basically larger than 800 square feet. If you look at subdivision E, the provision says any. I'm happy to send the legal interpretation. It's also on page 1920 of HED's handbook from July 2022. And you would be able to create 1 detached ADU, 1 converted ADU, and a JADU, if you can actually do that with your lot. Obviously, there's financial land constraints that prevent most people from doing that.
Great, thanks. Libby asks, are ADUs in the new code cycle required to be battery ready? Are they considered single family and under the same energy code requirements? Example for the battery ready.
So yes, yeah, as I stated during my presentation, that if it's a newly constructed building, the answer is yes. But as I stated, yeah, we just provided a clarification for the 225 amp requirement, depending upon the size of the ADU, requires 225 amps. So if the existing homes panel meets that criteria and they meet all the other requirements, they would satisfy the requirements if the sub panel to the ADU is less, as long as the main electrical panel meets that requirement and the others as well. So newly constructed ADUs must meet those energy ready requirements, unless with the building department, with setbacks, things of that nature for where the battery storage would go. So we're not requiring the battery storage. Some have expressed concerns over the spacing, things of that nature. If there's any other complications, they will need to consult with the building department to work those out. But the short answer is yes, the ESS ready requirements do apply. 225 amp can be satisfied, requirement can be satisfied using the main panel from the existing home.
Thanks.
And Chris, can I add to that?
Yeah, of course.
The code language is 225 amp bus bar rating panel. So we think that's an important detail because it doesn't mean you need 225 amps of connected power. It means you need a panel that's capable of routing that much power to a building. So maybe that helps as a clarification too.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
as long as it meets that buzz bar, correct, yeah. And we've clarified that in the blueprint as well, that a 200 amp can meet that satisfied as long as the buzz bar rating is 225, correct.
Yeah, good clarifications in this blueprint. Thanks, Chris.
Wonderful. Let's see. Oh, I see a question here for me. How do you go through the process of getting one's plans pre-approved? So in many of the municipalities that I'm involved in that have the pre-approved process, they usually either put up an RFP or they already have the program in place and you have to connect with their ADU professional at their municipality. You submit the plans as if you were submitting it for a site-specific property and go through the plan review process. Generally, I would have to pay the fee for plan review if that municipality requests that. And then once the plan is approved, then they put you up on their website and have the plan ready. It does mean that most municipalities don't allow any modifications to the plan once it is approved or plan reviewed in the process. And then the only thing that ends up happening during the process as far as for the site-specific portion of it is the site-specific site plan, and they review that for compliance for each individual property before issuing a permit. All right. There are quite a few questions about municipalities making it difficult to go through the extensive, here's one that says the extensive and onerous agency referral process, but there's quite a few questions about that. So what are we going to do, or does anyone have advice on what to do when you're getting a lot of pushback from a municipality, from any department who's basically saying, no, you can't do an ADU on this property? What next?
So I'll take that from a department or utility or an HOA right now.
Michael,
Right now,
I usually send people to Michael.
yeah.
We say
Send
contact
them to us.
HCD.
Yes, send them to us. Reggie just put the link to the portal in there to make sure that you all have that. I won't be responding personally to every single one, but we have a team and we're trying to grow it because there are a lot of requests. We get more than 10 a day.
Okay.
Sometimes the Casita Coalition will also send a letter to non-compliant jurisdictions or encourage friends of ours who do work in this space that have a lawyer's letterhead to send letters regarding non-compliance. But we only take those steps when the evidence of non-compliance is egregious. If it's that the building official can't get to it in 30 days because they've got too many permits on their desk, we tend not to. I think there's a difference between willful disregard and just not able to keep up. And we try to encourage additional steps in the category of willful disregard of state laws. And then patience with local building and zoning officials who are inundated, trying to keep up.
Yeah.
I would add to that here in Santa Barbara, I mean, we're not being told we can't. We're just finding more and more obstacles and more it's not, this is all supposed to be ministerial, and yet we're finding more and more of our ADUs are being pushed into design review. And then, I mean, and I don't think that's the spirit of what's supposed to be happening. The 60-day rule, I mean, to Denise's point, there's understaffing and that's invoked all the time, but they've also decided to interpret 60 days as every time the project comes before them or gets resubmitted. It's not total from beginning to end, from submittal to permit issuance. It's every time you put it in for plan check, it triggers another 60-day time period. And so, I mean, really, at the end of the day, it takes just as long as any other permit does. with the exception that sometimes you haven't triggered the need for design review, which adds months in and of itself to the overall process. So more, I don't know, like a sense of lack of cooperation than ever being told you cannot. Just kind of gumming up the works, where it seemed in the beginning like ADUs weren't allowed to go down that road.
Michael, I see your hand up. Do you want to answer some more to this?
Yeah, jurisdictions can toll time on that 60 days, but they can't restart it. If you're finding a jurisdiction's doing that, let us know. We're putting a database together pretty extensively on different issues, including utilities, school fees, jurisdictions that are finding creative ways of extending the 60 days or auto denying. SB 897, jurisdictions have to approve or deny, they cannot simply act on. And so therefore, if you're not getting it, you can demand an approval or a denial. If you're not getting that, and you're not getting an explanation of the timeline from the jurisdiction to you, where you're at in that queue, please let us know. Going back to the whole, yes, we're an enforcement agency. We also understand staffing issues, and we also understand lack of information, and that our primary mission is educational. We're here and to provide technical assistance. 80, maybe 90% of jurisdictions are happy to just interact with us and learn and change their tune or try their best to comply with state law once we get to them. But there's 7 of us and 500 jurisdictions. And so there's no way we know unless you guys are letting us know. I don't know if there's anything else within that, but I put in the answer, someone asked about deems complete. That's another huge question we get all the time. I put an answer in there that hasn't been vetted by our legal team entirely. So please feel free to follow up with us, but that's about as close to get on the 60-day and the wait times.
Thanks, Michael. And thank you, everybody. We are running short on time here, so there's a lot of great questions, and I'm sorry if we weren't able to get to your question. But do get back to, our panelists if you have any specific questions